The way I see it, we have reached a disturbing state in society. We've reached a state where humans essentially no longer care about truth. We've reached a state where the world is full of deniers, individuals who are hostile to the truth and are afraid of the truth. We've reached a state where human beings are interested in power narratives. That is, they are interested in beliefs that they can leverage or wield against other people, and those beliefs give them a sense or a feeling of power. Those beliefs make them feel important. Those beliefs allow them to feel authoritative when they interact with other humans, and they're addicted to this authority. They're addicted to this feeling of power, to this feeling of leveraging these beliefs. And the concern is not for truth. The concern is now for strong narratives of power. That's what people want. And it's very frightening because the ramifications of a society that seeks a power narrative and the desire to wield that narrative, we've seen this before in history. And the result of it is that it leads to one portion of the population violently persecuting another portion of the population with its sense of orthodoxy, its sense of dogma, its creedalism, because the power narrative, it's not something that is meant to be demonstrated. It's not a science. It's not meant to be verified. It's not meant to be rationally demonstrated or proven. Its function is a psychological one. Its function is to make the agent, the believer of the narrative, feel empowered. And that is what we are up against in our time, is legions and legions of truth deniers that only have a psychological interest in narratives that make them feel empowered. And they want to follow the viciousness of these narratives through to their logical ramifications. As I have thought about this, I thought of scenarios where individuals are trying to correct the error in these power narratives. They're trying to challenge the false authority of them, refute the false premises of them. And what you have in the advocates of these power narratives is a great joy and pleasure in imposing and forcing the narrative. This is deeply disturbing because they will take pleasure in using violence to censor those who try to contradict or challenge these power narratives, because the act of challenging them, it has the risk of negating the feelings that are produced by the power narrative. If these power narratives are refuted and negated, then the individuals who benefit from them psychologically can no more benefit from them. What happens to these individuals is that they lose the delusion of power. And this is why we find people not wanting to look into reality, not wanting to examine things or test things for truth, because they want the power. They don't want what's true. And I think at a much deeper level, and this is the most interesting thing to me, the more that thought penetrates into the complex nature of reality, the more we find that the conservative narrative of the world, the individualist narrative of the world, is shattered. Because the complexity that we observe is in a functional plurality. There is a social factor to it that accounts for quality. And what this means is that the individualism that resides at the base of almost all conservative ideology is actually destroyed as we probe into the nature of reality. The logic that's utilized in these regressive, conservative narratives it doesn't hold up. We find that it's actually an artificial, abstract, superimposed idealism that does not comport with reality itself. What we find instead in the nature of reality is pluralism. We find an interconnectedness. We find systems. And what that implies is it implies cooperation. And this is not the narrative that is trying to be pushed through these archaic ideological structures that are trying to enforce their control through violence. So as we dig deeper into reality, we find an emerging complexity. And this emerging complexity absolutely annihilates the conservative line. They're afraid of it, and so they want to go back to simple premises, to simple propositions, because this emergent complexity is painful. It's painful because it takes the power narrative away from these individuals. They can no longer wield this narrative, try to control people with these ideals. What happens instead is that their narratives lose power, and intelligence, rationality, the logic of nature that we observe directs human intelligence towards systems of conscious cooperation. It directs human intelligence toward systems of equality, towards systems of stability, towards systems of balance, towards systems of compassion. This is what happens. This is what emerges from this complexity. It's not a faulty social Darwinism that is emerging. It's a narrative of interconnectedness and cooperation. And the conservative mindset, the conservative position is deeply terrified of this for one simple reason. They lose their power. And power is the only thing they really want, because they think that having the power, simplifying things in terms of black and white categories and forcing the world into these artificial abstract slots, they think that this is how you achieve optimum order, and that's not what we find in the universe. That's not what we find in the order of nature and biology. That's not what we find. We find vast diversity, vast complexity, vast interconnection. We find cooperation. We're not finding this ideology, this individualist ideology is a lie. It doesn't exist. Wherever you have a qualitative individual, you have a chain of causation, a chain of interconnection that accounts for the quality of that individual. Conservatism is absolutely terrified of reality. That's why it tries to push things back to simple categories. That's why it doesn't care about truth. That's why it only cares about narratives of power.